It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it, I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble.
President Trump keeps the world guessing, but as missiles continue to fly between Israel and Iran, should the UK get involved?
We need to de-escalate this. Yes, the nuclear issue has to be dealt with, but it's better dealt with by way of negotiations than by way of conflict.
And remember this?
If you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here too. So today I can confirm, we will abolish the non-dom tax regime.
Well, that was last autumn, but is Rachel Reeves planning to backtrack on one of her flagship tax policies? We'll talk to former Chancellor Sir Jeremy Hunt about his new book, which argues that Britain can be great again, and
it works and it is safe and it provides dignity and choice for terminally ill people.
the assisted dying bill faces its last vote in the House of Commons tomorrow, but will it pass? And joining Conservative MP Jeremy Hunt today, Labour MP Polly Billington, Faiza Shaheen, the incoming Director of Tax Justice UK, which calls for more taxes on the wealthy, and the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. This is Politics Live. And we start with events in the Middle East and the situation there, with the Times reporting today that the UK is weighing up whether to provide the US with military support in the event that President Trump decides to bomb Iran, as those attacks continue there for a seventh day. But as we heard, the president not giving much way about what he will do. And Polly, if President Trump does decide to go ahead, how much support should the UK give to one of our closest allies?
Well, I think the key thing is for us to be playing our role on the global stage, which I'm sure Jeremy is keen to talk about as well, in terms of de-escalating this. Any kind of escalation is not going to benefit anybody, anyone who lives in Iran, anyone who lives in Israel, or anyone who lives here. So that is our key role as a global player, to get involved in diplomacy, to take the heat out of the situation.
Jeremy, you're a former Foreign Secretary, among many other jobs, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But there was a COBRA meeting yesterday, an emergency government meeting chaired by the Prime Minister. I mean, what sort of things will they have been discussing during that?
Well, this is a really difficult tightrope for Keir Starmer. Polly's absolutely right. We need to de-escalate, because the trouble with things in the Middle East is they tend to bring in countries from all over the world, and you can end up somewhere completely unexpected. But also on Keir Starmer's mind, which is why ultimately, if America does take action, I think we should support him, is the fact that in 10 days we have a very dangerous moment, which is the NATO summit. I was Foreign Secretary when when Donald Trump in 2018 nearly pulled America out of NATO. And Trump has said many things that are very sceptical about NATO, and he doesn't think Europe pulls its weight. And so another thing Keir Starmer will be thinking about is showing the US that we are there with them when they need us, will be one of the ways that we keep NATO, the most successful military alliance in history, on the road.
But is there a limit to how much we should support them?
Well, in the end, we have to do what is in our national interests. But I think we all believe that if Israel does take action against Iran's nuclear program, and if America joins in, we want them to succeed. I mean, in the end, if Iran gets a nuclear bomb, then Saudi will want one, Turkey may follow. You could end up with the very delicate consensus around non-proliferation being ripped up.
And Polly, that's the point, isn't it? If it gets to the point where diplomacy doesn't work, Keir Starmer can try and de-escalate this, but if Donald Trump does go ahead, should we back him?
Well, I think the key thing is what Jeremy said about what the kind of risks are around this, and that is the strength of NATO and the strength and importance of NATO, and de-escalating this because of the risks of proliferation. But almost everybody has emphasised, who knows anything about the situation when it comes to Iran and its nuclear programme, is that it is not a nuclear weapon state at this moment, and we need to make sure that it keeps that way.
But how do you stop that happening then? You wait until it has developed it.
Well, somebody very wise said, diplomacy fails until it wins. So we just have to keep talking and keep taking the heat out of this situation, because that's the most important thing. Now, you know, NATO is going to be important in this. We need to make sure that we are strong with our allies, as well as making sure that everybody understands that security actually means a lot of global cooperation rather than division like this.
Faiza, what do you feel about that?
I mean, I just think overall that Netanyahu and his extremist government have done a brilliant job at reframing what they're doing right now, right? They started bombing Iran, and, you know, it's really something, because this is actually about Netanyahu's political career. It's not about nuclear, and we have to be really important in giving that context, because that reminds us what's going on in Israel and their own political dynamics internally, and also what is still happening in Gaza and the West Bank. Just a couple of days ago, 80 people were killed. People are going to get food and are being shot. So we need to understand that this is about what Israel is doing, and Israel sees an opportunity with Trump in office to shape the Middle East in the way that they want. And I think this is so dangerous, and the vast majority of the public, very rightly, UK public, doesn't want us getting involved. And we should not get involved and be pulled into a war that is unjust, that is about Netanyahu saving his political career, and that would end up costing us money and making us part of something so morally wrong. You know, and then we're back in the Iraq War situation all over again. I mean, it's making me shake just thinking about what an awful situation this is. The context and the idea of us being pulled in, absolutely not.
Jeremy, what do you say to that? That this is about Israel, it's almost a distraction technique. Do you think there is a case for going in and bombing Iran and its facilities?
I would prefer to do this diplomatically, because I think that in the end, the trouble with the military approach is that you may make some progress in delaying Iran's nuclear program, but you make them even more determined to want to get a bomb. And what, you know, the people in Iran are thinking is they're looking at what happened to Gaddafi in Libya, what happened in Ukraine when it gave up its nuclear weapons, and they're saying maybe the only way we survive is to have a nuclear weapon. That said, once you start, you need to finish the job. And I think we are in a situation now where we need that nuclear program to be stopped. Unfortunately, I don't think there's an option to freeze the situation as it is now. Iran is pretty close to getting a nuclear weapon. And if they get that, that would completely upend any prospect of stability in the Middle East. It would be incredibly dangerous. So I actually agree with Faiza. There are lots of things that I don't like about what Netanyahu has been doing in Gaza.
So why should we follow them then?
But that doesn't mean that we don't have a very, very big issue with Iran.
Do you want to come back on that?
No, I mean, again, like, why are we following them, given that we know that this... I mean, why are we talking about Iran's nuclear right now in this moment? It's because Netanyahu wants us to. It's not actually this moment. Actually, the evidence isn't there to suggest that it's just about to happen. And they want to come to the table. They've been having negotiations. So I think, you know, this whole reasoning is deeply flawed in terms of the facts on the ground, but also morally. And again, the public absolutely doesn't support this. The Labour Party is already in trouble. It will be in more trouble if it carries on down this road. It's already in trouble for supporting Israel in various different ways, which is committing a genocide in front of our eyes. And so, you know, this is just... But
Faiza, if this isn't going to be about Netanyahu's future, it certainly shouldn't be about the Labour Party's prospects in the UK. This has to be about what has the best prospect of creating peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I don't think more
Iran
war is
with
going to create
nuclear
peace.
weapons, I'm afraid, is a very, very dangerous thing for the whole world.
Well, the Israeli Defence Minister has just said that the Ayatollah can no longer be allowed to exist because of the bombing of that hospital in Israel.
Well, Israel's bombed so many hospitals in Palestine. I mean...
It sounds like an escalation potentially. I mean, the Conservative Party in all of this, I mean, they have said that Israel has the right to defend itself, but they're not offering their full backing at this point, are they?
Well, I don't think any of Israel's allies, maybe with the exception of the US on a deniability basis, were keen on the idea of this escalating into a full-on war with Iran. You can see Israel's strategic position. Iran sponsored Hamas, it sponsored Hezbollah, it has been sort of creating a vector of militias to surround Israel all through the Middle East. And Israel has now that Iran is seriously strategically weakened, taken an opportunity to strike. Now, the military, in purely nuclear terms, the military option can work. It was Israel that took out, I think, the Tammuz reactor in Iraq in the 1980s. Now, the Hussein regime didn't fall until 2003. He never got the bomb. So you can, this sort of program takes an awful lot of investment, decades to build up, and you can dismantle it. I think essentially I agree with Jeremy. I think that at this point, when you've gone in, I don't think Britain has any business getting involved in direct strikes on Iran. I don't think that's necessary. Israel can do it. America is going to back it up. We don't need to be there. But for example, using British jets based in Cyprus to shoot down missiles aimed at civilian areas in Israel, we are formally Israel's allies. I think that would be defensible. If we didn't do that, I think we would have to do a formal re-evaluation of our entire diplomatic posture towards them.
Jeremy, do you think that's the case? And also, is there a possibility that the Britain has to get involved and give support because we are wanting to stay close to President Trump?
Right now, we have the most unpredictable president in the White House in living memory, and all sorts of foreign policy things that we've been used to for years are being stood on their head. I think it's really important, if Trump asked for military help, that we stand by him. And I think we can do that alongside having severe reservations about some of the things that are happening domestically in Israel, and also having a principled position that we would prefer the diplomatic route. But once you start any kind of military solution, you have to see it through. You have to make sure you win.
But it's not we right now. We don't need to be involved. And, you know, just to remember, during the Iraq War, when the US was going on, do you know who didn't go in with them? Canada. Their friend at that time, their friend neighbouring, wouldn't go in. So we actually do have a choice. And this idea that we just have to be a lapdog to the US, actually, maybe we should take a moral decision. And it won't. Listen, I work with the Arab region a lot. I'm an advisor to the UN in Beirut. I'm in Algeria next week. This will not help peace in the region.
Faiza, I understand your thinking, but let me say this. American taxpayers are paying for about a third of the cost of defending Europe. And we are in a security alliance with America where they put in far more than we do. And that is a fundamental problem for our NATO alliance, which is the thing that's kept us safe since the Second World War. So in that context, if the main ally, the biggest player in NATO, asks for help, I think we should give it.
I mean, I just completely disagree. And I think, again, if you look at the Iraq War, if you look at what Canada done, and not every country will follow the US, and it doesn't always, that there is some room for movement. And actually, I think the public would support that.
I think that's
talking about Britain being great again.
Yeah, but that's what Boris Johnson would call having your cake and eating it. I don't think it works that way.
We didn't go into Vietnam. There was strong American pressure on us to go into Vietnam, and we managed to stay out of that one. Right?
But if we think that keeping America as the world's most powerful democracy, as the leading defender of peace in Europe matters, then these are not easy decisions. There is a tightrope here, and I actually think Keir Starmer's not done a bad job on the international stage in walking that tightrope. But if we were to say, no thanks, we don't want to get our hands dirty, let's not kid ourselves. There is a price that will be paid.
Polly, do you think the Labour Party, do you think MPs would go along with that we have to support our ally in NATO?
I think MPs will be interested in working out how you play your role in de-escalating, because I don't think it's quite as binary as Jeremy is saying. I don't like to challenge that, bearing in mind he's been the Foreign Secretary and I'm just
There's still time, Polly.
So I just like to, put that caveat in. But I do think when people come up and propose a particular solution to a problem, it's worthwhile. The right thing to do as a friend and an ally is to say, is that absolutely the best thing you can do? Because there are some other options, and we know we're raising our defence spending in order to take on some of those challenges around NATO, and because we have an extraordinary amount of global insecurity and chaos, we need to play our part. That doesn't mean just doing what the White House says.
OK, let's move on to something a little bit closer to home. This is the headline in the Financial Times suggesting that Rachel Reeves might be exploring reversing a decision to charge UK inheritance tax on the global assets of non-DOMs. Now, they are UK residents whose permanent home for tax purposes is outside of the UK. And in April, the government abolished the centuries-old non-DOM so-called tax regime, which allows these individuals to shelter their worldwide assets from British taxes for a pretty hefty fee. Polly, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this should be reversed?
Well, I think the most important thing about taxes is that they do two things. One is raise enough money, and two, send a signal about fairness. And I do think I've probably got some differences of opinion with the people around the panel about that, but I do think that's what they should do. So that would be the test. Is this raising money? And is it sending a signal that the people who have got the broadest shoulders are bearing that burden in order for us to be able to renew our public services, ensure that we've got the NHS that we want, that we have got the breakfast clubs and the free school meals and all of those things that we're making sure that that most families have in this country? That will be my test. So I'm not a Treasury official and I'm not Rachel, so I'll leave it to her to make that judgment, but that will be my test.
Now, Jeremy, you nicked part of this original policy. It was a Labour policy, wasn't it? And you took it on. They've taken it even further. Do you think that the policy has caused millionaires to leave this country?
Without doubt. I mean, the evidence is very, very clear. And by the way, I think if Rachel Reeves reverses the inheritance tax element of this policy change, which wasn't, by the way, part of what I put in, that is a very brave thing to do. And we should recognise it's not an easy thing to do a U-turn on a flagship policy. And I think the reason that she is considering it is because there's actually a tension between those two things that Polly said. The one, the desire for taxes to raise money, and the other to send a signal about fairness. Now, the signal about fairness was why I decided that we had to get rid of the non-dom regime.
Some would say it was politics.
Well, I don't think
taking away something from Labour's spending plans.
I'm quite happy when people agree with us, that's all.
OK.
Yes,
okay.
But I'm also happy when people agree with us and say that it shouldn't extend to inheritance tax. But no, I think the signal about fairness, you cannot justify why very wealthy people should be paying a lower tax rate than people on much lower incomes. But at the same time, what the inclusion of inheritance tax has done has meant that these non-doms, who, by the way, invest on average, according to Oxford Economics, on average, £120 million each into the UK economy. If they start leaving in huge numbers, that means fewer jobs for people, often on low incomes, and it means less tax revenue to fund things like the NHS. And I think you have to be pragmatic.
But do you think that original policy, the original policy that you introduced, do you think it is causing people to leave? Not just the inheritance tax element of it.
I think the policy that I introduced, I went through it in enormous detail with experts in the city, and I said, look, I want a fairer tax system, but I don't want capital flight. I don't want people to leave the UK. And they said, on that basis, do what you're going to do. Scrap non-dom status, but don't touch inheritance tax, because that is the thing that will really drive people abroad. And so I think if this change happens, look, it's very painful politically. I don't want to underestimate that. It would be painful, by the way, for a Conservative party to do that sort of, for a Conservative Chancellor to do that sort of U-turn. But in the end, as Chancellor, you have to do what is going to create jobs and wealth for everyone. And I think this is one of those examples.
Pfizer, do you think there's an exodus of these very wealthy people?
Well, no, actually, and Tax Justice Network and Tax Justice UK did some joint research actually drilling down into some of these numbers, and you get all of these headlines. Now, and some work that some colleagues of mine at London School of Economics have done as well, is that when you actually go and speak to millionaires and billionaires, they aren't all saying we're going to leave, and they have lots of reasons to stay in the UK, often to do with the kids the schools that their kids are at. I mean, the
Which
big
now
thing
have
here,
VAT, by the way.
I
so
would
that's
say,
another
They don't
point.
have to pay for private schooling, Jeremy.
Yeah.
That's
They
not actually
don't.
compulsory.
Which is good.
But most of them do, and that's
also their choice.
Do you know what?
and
One
if
thing
they're
I would say,
earning
hang on,
enough,
don't
that's
speak over
fine.
each other.
One thing I would say about this is if any working or middle-class person in this country said, oh, I actually don't want to pay these taxes, and then lobbied the government really hard, they would just do it anyway. This is actually the power of the rich to lobby the government and get the rules changed as they want. We are rewarding bad behaviour. Absolutely. Rachel Reeves said it herself. If they live in this country, they should pay taxes like anyone else. We all have to pay inheritance tax if we have any money, right? Any wealth stored in that way. And so they should have to do the same. And talk about being patriotic. Be patriotic. Care about this country. Actually, this is a moment when we need that money. We're talking about cuts to disability benefits in this country
being
right now.
patriotic is growing the economy in a way that creates jobs for ordinary people on low incomes. That is not happening at the moment. Driving people who set up businesses and invest money out of the UK is going to mean fewer jobs for people who need them. That's why I think you have to be pragmatic.
Pfizer, you also want a wealth tax, don't you?
Yes.
That's something that you're campaigning for. How would that work?
Well, the idea is to have, for those with wealth, and I just want to be clear that we're not talking about taxing work more. Work is taxed enough. The very richest in this country have got a lot richer. 50 families in this country now have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the whole population. That's a huge difference, right? And so these people are getting a lot richer on wealth, often, housing wealth, investment wealth. Those that have got over 10 million, which is very, very few of us, will be asked to pay a 2% tax on that. And that would raise around £24 billion. If you think about the cuts that are being made for welfare, for instance, that's £5 billion. There's some very serious political decisions that need to be made in this country at this moment because our services don't have enough money. The Labour Party's ruled out taxes in various different places. So that doesn't leave very much room left. So I think wealth is an obvious place to go.
And it's something that several Labour MPs are raising. Are you tempted by it?
Well, I think we have to remember that we've already raised some wealth taxes. We've raised wealth on private jets. We've raised wealth on private schools, as Jeremy's just pointed out, and we raised tax on private equity. So I don't think the idea that we're not raising taxes on wealth is a fair accusation. And I think what's important is, again, what works. Where do we get the money in, and whether it works? And the wealth taxes that Pfizer is suggesting have not worked when they've been tried in various different European countries. They have not generated the amount of income that they've claimed that they would do. So people have ended up sort of putting them to one side. So I don't think I would love to find some new and useful
Norway
ways.
and Spain. So again, governments that I've worked with and previously actually have implemented them, despite. People, I think there was this Guardian article that was completely wrong in terms of its numbers. A tiny percentage of the very rich left, like 1%, and they did generate a lot more money from it. And that's why the Norway, say, still has a wealth tax. If they were losing money, then they wouldn't still have it.
Henry,
so there are examples of where you do have to do the communications work around it. And, I've done work around the world where they called it a solidarity tax, where they're being very clear about how that money is going to be used. There's patriotic millionaires in this country that are going around saying tax us more. I mean, they can see their money day to day just go up without doing anything. That's
Henry,
do you think
a patriotic tax, a wealth tax, is it a flyer?
Well, I mean, it's always a slightly, whenever you have to start waving the flag to try and justify people staying in the country. So there's a few general observations. One, every European country that has higher average public spending than we do has higher average taxes on middle earners and work, right? So there's not really a country that is actually sustaining a higher level of public investment on the basis of a wealth tax. Most countries, like Switzerland has a wealth tax, but it also doesn't have anything else. So you have to think of the challenge of having it as an additional tax. Then if you're having it as an overall wealth tax, how is that going to be assessed, right? Because your net wealth consists of your assets, which would have to be valued. How frequently, on what basis? That's quite invasive. And so then do you do financial or non-financial wealth, right? Because if you do financial wealth, liquid wealth, that's the people we tend to think of as the rich. But that's also the most mobile, right? And the more that you concentrate taxes on those people, the more resources they have, and the more that you tend to see taxes like this drive diversionary behaviour rather than revenue. If you do non-financial wealth, I mean, that's anyone with, is property. I mean, property tax in this country would probably be economically just and good overall, but good luck to any government that tries to do it.
Who's got a house worth 10 million?
Well, I mean, it's portfolios, right? It's that.
Well, then you can afford to. I mean, you have a portfolio of more than 10 million.
Have you thought about the? I'm not saying necessarily that you might want to do that. Have you thought about the consequences of that, right? Like, about who you would end up that land being sold to. Right? Because that's what you would be doing. You would end up driving this land into the hands of people who could afford to pay the wealth tax, or you'd end up tanking it, and what would happen? Like, there's just all these second-order consequences that I think you need to look through when you're proposing to bring in a tax like that. Because historically, we have seen in the past that well-meaning interventions on big structural things like land ownership have delivered quite serious second-order consequences that nobody really saw at the time. And it's not necessarily that they wouldn't be justified, but you do need to know what they are.
Well, of course, you have to think these things through. But absolutely, we have seen in the past, historically, when the rich have put in more money, when there has been money for a welfare state, the NHS and the rest of it, when you are able to tax the rich and the rich feel part of the country and feel, happy to pay their taxes, then you are able to do a lot for the general community across the country.
But no European country with higher spending than us does it through a wealth tax, right? Well, they might have wealth taxes, but every single one of them has higher taxes on working people and average earners, right? There isn't a single one that maintains lower taxes on work than us and tops up the difference with a wealth tax.
Well, they do top up the difference in different ways. So, for instance, it's much cheaper to have to use childcare in Germany. Spain has a much larger welfare state in terms of how many people are getting, the percentage of the population now getting some form of payback in benefits. They also have something on childcare.
Well, that would be
so you
public
get
spending.
so you get something.
You said it was okay for 1% of rich people to leave the country, as happened in Norway. What would be the impact in terms of the jobs and the economic growth for people on low incomes if 1% of wealthier people left the country? I'm sorry, it would not be something you could ignore. And I think Polly is absolutely right. You have to be pragmatic. I agree with you. We need to be a society that tackles inequality. But I think there are much, much better ways to do it. For example, raising the standards in state schools, which now have the highest reading standards in the Western world. They have math standards that are second only to those in East Asia. That is a brilliant way of tackling entrenched inequality. And I think what you would do, though, would reduce opportunities, because what it would mean is that when it came to budgets, Rachel Reeves would have less money to invest in nuclear power stations, less money for the NHS, and she would end up, despite best endeavours, as Henry says, putting up taxes on working people to plug the gap.
I think, I think the best evidence to show that what is working, with all rich people not paying non-dem tax and the rest of it, that's the status quo. That's what we've had. You were in government for 14 years. Inequality didn't fall. The rich got a lot richer during that period.
Actually, there were 1 million
we had
fewer people. Hang on, Fraser. There were 1 million fewer people in absolute poverty at the end of our time.
Child poverty rose during that time.
Child poverty fell by 100,000 children.
Look,
sorry, I mean, it's really important.
This is so divorced from reality.
It's not. No, this is actually the facts. I know there's a line that you would like to put out, but the reality is that we did very difficult welfare reforms over those 14 years. And child poverty, the number of children in absolute poverty after housing costs went down.
After housing costs, that's a huge thing.
That is very important. No, of course you have to include housing costs, because you can't do it before housing costs, because that's completely ignoring. Housing costs are one of the biggest expenses lower-income families have. So you have to take the figure after housing costs. And the figure after housing costs says that the number of children in absolute poverty fell, and that is because there were 4...
poverty is the important measure that we use in this country.
It's
so
not.
This is really...
You use both depending on your political persuasion, but there were 4 million more jobs.
You can lift one person.
That lifted people out of poverty.
I mean, I know we do use it, but just to point out, relative poverty is just an inequality metric. You can lift one person out of relative poverty by confiscating a lot of money from another person and setting it on fire, right? Like, absolute poverty is the one that represents a concrete status in people's lives.
From the realities of talking to people out there.
How many
people are struggling with their bills? How many people are struggling to feed their kids? This is the reality.
They'd still be struggling if someone else was poor.
It is absolute poverty, Fraser.
Jeremy, you at one point, as the Chancellor to Liz Truss, had to find £72 billion in a matter of days, and you did seem to do that. How would you do that now, given the government is looking for savings?
Well, I think that the thing that incidentally would be the most effective at tackling poverty, which I absolutely think we should do, be very good for the economy and help Rachel Reeves, is tackling the explosion that we have in the welfare state, particularly when it comes to working age adults. And if we got the cost of the working age benefit bill down to just the levels of 5 years ago, at constant prices, that saves about £49 billion a year. And there are lots of reasons why that's happened. But it seems to be something that's happened particularly since the pandemic. It's not easy, I recognise, particularly for the Labour Party, it is very challenging. But I think over the course of a parliament, to say we're going to bring the benefits bill for working age people down to just the level it was in 2019 is not an unreasonable aspiration.
This is one of the ideas in your book, which you have written, called Can We Be Great Again? Why a Dangerous World Needs Britain. Firstly, there's a MAGA-inspired title there. I was expecting you to come in with a cap.
Well, look, I don't think... There it is, there's the book.
Come on.
I don't think that Donald Trump should have a monopoly over the word great. I wouldn't describe myself...
So why did you write the book?
Because and by the way, I think there's lots in this book that people from all parties will be able to agree with. I think that we actually have a lot more influence in the world than we tend to believe. And I'll give you one example. The Centre for Economics and Business Research say that we're the 6th largest economy in the world. And in 15 years' time, and they're the only people who actually do these calculations 15 years ahead, where do they say we'll be? They say we'll still be the 6th largest economy in the world. In fact, we'll have closed the gap with Japan and Germany. So I think when you have a very, very dangerous world, what this book does is it looks at what influence Britain has when it comes to European security, the future of democracy, climate change, the migration crisis, and all these big issues. Out of 193 countries in the United Nations, we are always, according to the experts, in the top 10. And my argument is not isolationism. I say, in a very dangerous world, countries with influence should roll up their sleeves and use it.
I mean, you've got some ideas in there, and some people will think they are good ideas, but I suppose the question is, you were in power for a very long time. I mean, you were in the cabinet for years and years. Why are these ideas, why now? Why couldn't you do them when you were in power?
I think,
did you try?
Lots of them we did. I tried to be very honest in the book about saying what I did that was right, what I did that was wrong, and what I think we should do now. But I think it's a good thing for politicians who've been in office to be reflective and honest about what they got right and what they got wrong. And that's what I try and do.
But is being in power, I mean, obviously every party aspires to be in power. Is there something limiting about it?
There's certainly something limiting about what you can say, because you have to follow the party line, as Polly is discovering now, and that does provide some constraints. So it's a delight to be able to be completely honest about things, including the things that you yourself got wrong. But I suppose what I really think, it's a great question, by the way, Vicky, is that when you are doing a job like Chancellor or Foreign Secretary, you think you know it all. You're getting all this fantastic advice from officials, and you're talking about it every day, you're living and breathing, you think you know it all. When you sit down and try and write a book about it, you discover that at most, you know perhaps 60%, but there's a great big gap of other stuff that you haven't really had time to think through properly. And
I'm not sure if this is reassuring or slightly worrying.
Maybe it's honest.
Yeah, maybe it's honest. Polly, I mean, the constraints of power? I mean, obviously the Labour Party...
Well, I don't know, I'm just a backbencher.
Well,
I'm interested in what Jeremy says, particularly about the welfare stuff. If you think you could save 450 to 500 billion quid a year, why didn't you do it?
Billion.
Sorry, 49 billion. Why didn't you do it?
Well, actually, we did make some very big welfare reforms.
Yeah, but the suggestions you got in your book you didn't make.
Well, because it's actually quite a recent thing, and the reason for the explosion in the working age benefits really happened since the pandemic, and it's also linked to quite a recent phenomenon, which is the way that we treat people with mental health. And my argument is that if someone has mental illness, and I feel very passionately about this, having been Health Secretary, we should be treating them, not putting them on benefits, because all the doctors say that if you have mental illness, social contact is really important, and putting people on benefits where they don't have to either go to work or look for work is more likely to create social isolation and make the problem worse, not better.
I don't want to be antagonistic about this, but I think I might end up being a little bit, on the basis that we don't have a mental health service good enough, partly because of the decisions that you made in office, which means that I know I've got constituents who are using their personal independence payments to pay for healthcare that should be free under the NHS.
Well, let me respond to that, but perhaps not in quite such a partisan way. But I don't mind you asking it, because I actually did a lot for mental health and put a lot more money into it, and there are 2 million more people getting mental health treatment on the NHS every year than when I started. But we need more, because at the same time as that happening, demand has grown even faster. And my argument is that if we're going to be spending taxpayers' money, better to spend it on treatment than on benefits.
And you said, Jeremy, didn't you, in the book that actually, because you insisted, didn't you, that there was parity between mental health and physical health. And do you think that has led to some of this?
So the law has changed, and rightly protects equality insofar as mental health and physical health. We used to have this problem, particularly in the NHS, that it would give much more priority to physical health than to mental health. We're still not there, but we're getting better. But I think treating people with parity of esteem, which is the phrase the law used, doesn't mean treating people the same way. And I think that, for people with mental illness, making it easier for them to stay in the world of work is one of the most important things we could do.
Liza, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, the reason why there's so many people, and young people, that feel mentally unwell is because we live in a really difficult society. Looking at your phone and seeing a live stream genocide doesn't help. Getting jobs, how difficult it is to get a good job, move out of your parents' home. there's some real reasons why mental health is so bad, and especially amongst young people in this country, and it's really worrying. And I agree, of course, we should be putting more money into treatment. We should be doing more about the factors that are making people mentally ill, mentally unwell. And I think, coming back to the cuts, cut in spending on this, 77% of the public would prefer us to tax the rich more than cut public spending. There's just no appetite for austerity now. And I think, the cuts, the 5 billion cuts proposed in this welfare bill, especially that will affect disabled people, I just think it's profoundly wrong.
But it is still projected to go up hugely. This is not about even keeping it level, is it? The cuts that are being proposed.
Yeah,
I think sustainable?
Well, I think we have to deal with the underlying drivers of this problem. I don't think that cutting will help. I know that there's, I was looking at the studies, and I'm old enough to remember when the new Labour government under Labour put loads of money into giving people like support to get them into work and someone to advise them. But actually what happened was they were going into work, poorly paid, falling out of it. Others that were really unwell, it was very, very expensive to support them. So it actually doesn't cut the budget. And I think we really need to be careful here that we're not punishing people. And, for a Labour government to do this, I think a lot of people will feel very betrayed.
I mean, the Conservatives say they want to make welfare cuts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the entitlement spending is at this point essentially eating British politics from the inside out. And that entitlements means it's the sort of spending where instead of having a budget and then deciding how you spend it, you set criteria for eligibility, and then the Treasury just kind of discovers year on year how many people it's going to have to pay what. But with my sort of generational warfare hat on, it is a bit strange. I agree that there are almost certainly savings to be made on the welfare budget, but nonetheless, it is a bit strange to constantly focus on benefits for working age people when we're still maintaining the pension triple lock, right? Which is essentially completely untargeted, unrestricted welfare directed to this country's wealthiest age cohort, both by asset wealth on average and weekly income. So, you could stop that. You could turn that into a more targeted benefit. Nobody who actually needs money would lose out from doing that. And then you could maybe, as you move down the order of priorities, get to working age benefits, which, given how far British state spending is exceeding tax revenue, will have to do something, because otherwise I think just social care, the NHS and pensions is going to push tax up to 46% of GDP.
I mean, Polly, do you think the triple lock, given some of the U-turns that the government's had to do, it does seem unlikely that the triple lock would be changed? Yeah, do you think it's possible?
Look, I think what we know is that we've inherited a welfare system that doesn't work for people. Enormous amounts of people have basically been parked and abandoned on welfare, and this does have some echoes to what the new Labour government experienced in 1997.
So will you vote for these changes? There's a vote coming up in 2 weeks.
Well, I'm continuing to engage with the government and expressing my concerns about some of the changes.
Okay.
I will be very honest with you. I have those conversations. There are over 400 MPs, Labour MPs, who have conversations with their constituents every week in their surgeries where they are seeing people really anxious. So I want to make sure that people understand that these changes are going to be ones that will support them to have a right to try, which I think is really important in some of the concerns that both Henry and
But it will mean the loss of hundreds of pounds, if not more, for a lot of people.
And make sure that we make a distinction between those that are about helping people into work and ones which reflect the fact that we have a system which has always, since the Second World War, when we established the welfare state, a principle that you have support in order for you to be able to navigate the world that is not designed for you. It used to be called the mobility allowance, then it was called many other things before it became called personal independence payments. That principle needs to be there, and we may well need to change who gets it and how much they get, but the idea that should be what we've got is a kind of mix-up in the conversation, suggesting that all of this welfare is about people lounging around not doing anything. A lot of people on personal independence payments are working. Those personal independence payments help them work.
But just tell us how you're going to vote. You might just tell us. How are you going to vote? What have you told your whip?
Engage in this way, in a fair and frank exchanges with my colleagues who are having to make very, very difficult decisions because that welfare bill is going up. And we are failing thousands and thousands of people. And that's what makes me angry.
But at this point, you could still oppose this.
I'm just saying I'm going to keep talking to them. Because, as you say, as I said about diplomacy, you're always failing until you win.
This is proving my point that when you're on the backbenches as a new MP, you can't say what you really think.
Well, look, we can say what we really think about our next issue, which is tomorrow. There will be the final vote in the House of Commons to potentially allow terminally ill people with less than 12 months to live to be helped to end their lives. Now, there was a pretty big majority in favour of this at second reading. There's lots of speculation about whether people have changed their minds or not on all of this, but it's a free vote. And Polly, what is your view on this?
I'm not in principle against the idea of assisted dying. I think everybody should be able to have some kind of control and choice and autonomy in order to be able to have a dignified death. I'm unfortunately just really uncomfortable with this bill. I'm comfortable about the process and I'm uncomfortable with the safeguards in place. My initial concern was that what on earth are we doing spending this amount of time and effort establishing a principle of assisted dying when we don't have the palliative care that would actually provide really good choice? I think that's very important. And the safeguards for me around people who are vulnerable and exposed to coercion, particularly those with learning disabilities. There were amendments proposed by MenCap that were voted down at the committee stage. I just don't think that anybody who's going through the lobbies tomorrow can be really confident that this bill would have the protections that we really need for those of us who really care about making sure that everybody has those protections.
Jeremy, what do you make of the bill and the safeguards?
Well, I think, Polly's absolutely right to think about the protections, but I'm actually one of those MPs who, over my time in Parliament, has actually changed my mind on this. When it came up under previous governments, I've always voted against it. My gran lived until she was 100. Every time I visited her, she was worried about being a burden on her family, and I worried this could inadvertently create a pressure on her that wouldn't be fair. But in the end, to be completely honest, I just thought that if I was in the situation where I had a horrible terminal illness and less than 6 months to live, I would want the autonomy and choice over my final few weeks and days. And if I would want that for myself, I didn't feel I could vote against it for...
I mean, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has expressed his concerns about this and how it will work within the NHS, even who will offer this. We don't know the answers to all of that yet. I mean, what do you make of his concerns?
Well, I had the same concerns when I was Health Secretary, but there has been a big change, which is that bodies representing doctors on the whole, not without exception, have moved from being totally against assisted dying to being officially neutral. And so I think the medical profession has recognised that when we have this wonderful thing for humanity, that we're all living longer, what it also means is that many more people are going to have quite a long period of illness before they die. And we need to have a more honest conversation about death. And it's a very uncomfortable and difficult thing to do. But I think tomorrow is one of those moments.
I think if you were just talking about the principle, Jeremy, that would be fine, because what's interesting is that a lot of those organisations have moved from being against to being neutral, but their concerns about this specific bill are very clear. The Royal College of Psychiatrists, the Royal College of Pathologists, the Association of Palliative Care, all of these are concerned about this bill. So you can be in favour of the principle and still have concerns about this bill, because you know, as a former Secretary of State, the consequences for the NHS and indeed for everybody involved if we end up with a situation where people are ending up on a pathway which they shouldn't be going down.
That's true, Polly, but also not changing the law, sticking with the status quo.
I would love it not to be binary.
Also has consequences for people facing a long and very painful death, that they want some autonomy and control as they face up to a very horrible moment in their life.
I would also want to just pick up that thing about you'd like it for yourself. I would like it for myself, but I don't feel like I'm a legislator for people like me. I'm a legislator for the people who don't have a voice. And I'm so struck by some of my colleagues, particularly the black women on our side of the chamber, who have spoken up about their anxieties for themselves, for their communities, and for people who are often marginalised and demeaned. 60% of the people who died during COVID had disabilities.
So we have to leave it there, but tomorrow thank you. Tomorrow you can watch the full assisted dying debate on BBC Parliament. I'll be back with more Politics Live on Monday. Thank you for watching.